Welcome. Well, thank you, Martina, for the warm introduction. We've been hiding out backstage, in anticipation. So thank you. We're from Simon Fraser University, which is what is now called Vancouver. So in Vancouver, Canada, and across Canada, we like to acknowledge the history of the land that we start on as a good way of starting a conversation. So I want to acknowledge that we are on the Coast Salish peoples, traditional and unceded territories here, and I'd invite you all to join us just for a moment to think about the history of where you're standing and what brought you here today as a way of sort of grounding where we're all at right now in COVID. So my name is Jennifer Wolowic. I'm with the Simon Fraser University Morris J. Wosk Centre for Dialogue, and I'm joined by Janet and Doug from the Simon Fraser University's Public Square. And we're here to talk about an innovative experimental series that we did in response to COVID. All three of our organizations do in-person events most often, but within a month of COVID, we partnered to try something new online. So if you haven't seen it yet, please do try and watch our video. I think Doug's going to drop it into the discussion area if we could figure out the brand new platform. We're all winging it here and seeing what's going to happen. So in 2020, we hosted 17 events on a range of topics. Each welcomed between 100 and 400 participants. And throughout the series, we were joined by over 80 guest speakers and special guests. Today, we're going to share some of those key ingredients from partnerships, communications, and after-event activities that we know contributed to the success of the series. And so to get us started, I'm going to pass this over to Janet.
Thanks, Jen. So as Jen mentioned, Distant Not Disengaged was created as a response to the urgent crisis of COVID-19, which was and still is impacting us in profound ways. People were scared. The information landscape was overwhelming and opaque, and the very things that would normally help us to cope and manage through challenging times, such as our daily routines and social interactions, were acutely disrupted. Our team of collaborators, two of the three teams are here with you today. Each in their own way have a mandate to encourage connection within community, to help mobilize knowledge, to support social infrastructure, and to encourage democratic values and engagement. It made sense for us to work together to achieve our shared goals. But given our positions, networks, and resources, it made even more sense for us to widen the circle and create a platform for those who are already working on the ground, responding to emerging issues, and addressing the holes in our social safety nets made larger by the pandemic. We recognize the importance of including those with lived experience of the social issues, which, though urgent before the pandemic, were now even more so, and hearing from others, such as academics and practitioners who were striving to rapidly provide recommendations for policy and decision makers in real time. We looked at topics such as mutual aid responses, the impacts of COVID on the arts and culture sector, issues with elder care, anti-Asian racism, race and representation in the media, the overdose crisis, food justice, social cohesion, and democratic engagement, and more. We agreed as a team to do a rigorous weekly event schedule to build an audience and provide a sense of regularity and routine for people, and arranged to each take the planning lead on alternating weeks. Though all three planning teams contributed to different aspects of the logistics and operations required to produce the series each week, the lead for that week would facilitate the relationships and partnerships and determine the focus. As the series evolved and we more deeply embraced an experimental, collaborative, and reciprocal approach, the power distribution shifted, and the individuals and organizations we reached out to work with us on particular topics were provided with more jurisdiction to shape and to lead. We sought funding, which allowed us to compensate our partners for their work, and we, the presenting partners, began to move more into a supportive position. We provided the infrastructure, but got out of the way to let those who knew the problem best and were closest to it design the agenda and propose other speakers they felt best prepared to address the topic. Our programs were in the habit of paying attention to current affairs, but in this moment, continuing on with business as usual felt irresponsible. There were issues that needed to be talked about. There was work happening that deserved to be profiled. And there were people and organizations that would benefit from both being able to be heard by, as well as hear from our attendees, an audience which most likely would extend beyond their usual supporters and spheres of influence. Now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Doug, who'll get into some of the particulars of our pivot to the online environment.
Thank you, Janet. One of the fundamental things we wanted to achieve with Distant Not Disengaged was to try to replicate some of the opportunities for connection that come with an in-person community event to combat social isolation and promote community resilience. So we wanted to have these events avoid being broadcast platforms from a panel of experts to a passive audience. We wanted to make a space for engagement, and to make these engaging spaces more inclusive, we also worked to provide either closed captioning or ASL interpretation or both at almost all of our events. And to overcome our physical distancing, we made time for breakout rooms at almost every event to bring people together for small group conversations on the topic at hand, or just to see each other. After so much time isolated and in our own heads, there was often this just incredible appreciation to just see and hear from other people, to engage with ideas and experiences not our own. And we also encouraged an active chat. We had moderators assigned to share information or links to supplement the discussion, and we would share those out afterwards. And we also recognized that the digital space can make it easier for people to make hurtful comments or disruptions, especially in light of some of the topics that we were taking on. So our teams took a workshop on challenging facilitation to be more ready to intervene if comments might contravene our community guidelines. And we established these community guidelines early on in the series. We shared them before and at the beginning of each event, because if we were going to be in the space together, we all had to respect a few basic things. 1, provide your full name for accountability. 2, there will be zero tolerance for promoting violence, hate, and discrimination. 3, be as present as you can be. But 4, practice self-care if you need to. 5, don't assume people's pronouns or gender based on what's on their screen. And 6, step up and step back. If you've made a comment, leave space for others. Now, as you can imagine, all of this required a lot of behind-the-scenes work. We had more people working on a digital event than we normally had on live ones. We had people to send people to breakout rooms, to add to and monitor the chat, to provide tech support, to share screens and advance slides, etc. And getting proficient at this took a lot of experimentation and took time. But it yielded a lot of valuable knowledge that I think we happen to be early adopters within our sphere. And we were lucky to be able to share that knowledge within Simon Fraser University and the community partners that we worked with. Members of our team have gone on to give workshops, prepare guides for others on how to do this. And I think that just provides one example of how this series has more life than just the discussions themselves. It has kind of a longer tail impact that I will let Dr. Wolowic speak to.
So in addition to the partnerships, in addition to the different work that was really happening behind the scenes, there was often about 10 to 15 people working behind the scenes, either as breakout facilitators or whatnot happening. We also put in a lot of effort of what happened afterwards. We wanted to make sure that there was a lasting impact, that these weren't just one-off interesting conversations that happened for an hour. We wanted them to have legacies beyond this. So we really prioritized inviting special guests, which we call witnesses, and circulating the ideas that came up in the event with the attendees and these key stakeholders afterwards. So in some indigenous spaces, as I mentioned in Coast Salish people's traditional territories where we stand, so we learn from some of them and try to apply it. Witnessing has an important role for validating and legitimizing important actions, discussions, and events. As a witness, you take on the responsibility to observe and share stories of the event. Afterwards, with those who weren't there, it helps to spread the word or legitimize what happened. So we invited special guests to act as witnesses. So they were there in listening mode and really there to hear what the conversation was, hear what both the speakers and the participants said, and to take that back into their everyday work. We customized this list of special guests every topic. For example, witnesses included local transit authority leadership, elected officials, community organizers, official advocates, and university leadership across British Columbia. Many of the conversations acted as space for idea generation and sharing between guest speakers and the public. So after the events, we compiled summaries of key takeaways, as well as comments from the audience into resource documents that we circulated after the event. Sometimes they were in the form of a graphic facilitation or like a cartoon that was created as we spoke through the event. An artist was visually summarizing our themes. Other examples included a slide deck of suggestions that students came up with during the event about how to improve their COVID-19 learning experiences that we circulated with over a dozen different universities across BC who had sent someone in as a witness. And so about a week after the event, these links and resources were shared with the audience as well as the key stakeholders. And we would send the summary of what was happening in the chat as well. The chat became a space where people shared links that then helped create a life after the event. So these added steps strengthened our university and community connections and really made it a responsive environment. So again, if you haven't seen our video for this event, please take a moment to find it. Doug has shared it in the discussions. It's really a fantastic video that showcases the highlights. And you've heard us talk today about the strengths of partnerships using Zoom and our communications tools to the fullest to really create connections in online environments, as well as how we prioritize closing the loop with participants and creating impacts after the event. These are just some of the things that we believe made the program such a great university community innovation during a time of crisis.